I think first to my lovely teammates. I think this has been a good team. We've had some fun and some right calls. Besides that, my Depsok, I think Nimbus ARST Depsok has been I think I'm incredibly proud of my juniors who have opened reserve here. And lastly, my parents, I think they're just incredible. With that, I will begin starting with my speech in 3, 2, 1. Just 2 things within my speech. What are we banning? How do we do this efficiently? Why is it good? Secondly, why are drugs or these rituals banned? First burden is what are we banning? I think we are specifically banning certain kind of rituals that depend on psychedelics for gratification. These rituals are including but not limited to the ones mentioned in the context slide when you're using certain kinds of drugs to get like sort of feel sort of happy or see God like you do in Rastafari religion, etc. But secondly, we ban the use of drugs for any religious purposes generally as well. So the ban is not just related to rituals, but if there's any other overarching factor that includes these sort of drugs, we're also going ahead and ban it. How do we ban and why is this ban going to be effective? There are 5 things under this. We think first and simply the narcotic boards of the country we are banning enforces this, and this enforcement is going to be pretty strong because the war on drugs is currently going. Second, we think awareness/education campaigns, not just government but also NGOs who want this practice to go away, and NGOs who want to go ahead and save people, not right now. Thirdly, we think there are whistleblowers who actually go ahead and sort of call this thing out within religion itself. So if my brother, if my sister, if my friend has been harmed by this practice within a religion and the government bans this, I go ahead and call this out if I see this practice being propagated even after the ban. That's the third mechanism. Fourthly, we think there's competition between religions that exist. So if you see some other religion that's going ahead and practicing this, you have incentives to go and call them out to sort of take away their legitimacy, because we think this sort of innate competition always exists between religions. But fifthly and most importantly, we think state funding, etc. is a factor and mechanism through which these religions go ahead and build their madrasas or give education or do like various numbers of stuff, which means that this funding is important to them. So this funding is now conditional, and this comes at the cost of the religion ensuring that this practice is not done, but also ensuring that there are certain awareness campaigns against this particular practice. This explains the setup. I think within these metrics you're also able to gauge why these are efficient and why these are all dependent. Secondly, why are drugs bad and why are these practices bad? The first claim is principled as always. Your agency is fucked. What are the mecs under this? I think first, when you're making this decision, you're significantly vulnerable. What are intuitions for this? We think first you can't have a rational choice because you make this decision when you're in the worst of your mental phase. You've lost a daughter, you've lost your business, you've suffered significant monetary or like personal losses, which means that you want some crazy amount of hope that God exists. This is the point in time you want to opt into this ritual, which is sort of seen as a Hail Mary to get proof about the existence of God. This means when you're making this choice to opt into these drugs, this choice is made in an uninformed manner or in a bad manner. So on a principled claim, we say that you don't know that this drug is bad for you, you don't have the money to inform yourself, you've just lost something which is very important to you, which means your agency to take this decision or to opt into this psychedelic ritual is violated. We think this is an independent principled harm we push on side opposition. Secondly, we think religions weaponize this, and this happens in the worst way. First, we think this happens when you are the most distressed. Religions want you to cling to God instead of taking time and pulling away from the religion, which is why they push you to these rituals, and which is why they push you to take drugs, because they know for a fact that these are changes in your brain chemistry which will make you hooked forever to the religion, because religion is the only place that gives you access to these things. But secondly, we think they ask you to propagate this to other people as well, in which case the agency of these other people also gets fucked, because religions literally ask you to go ahead and have your friends, have your parents, have other people in your family, in your social circle, go ahead and get trapped into this, which means the harms also trickle down onto them. Before I go to other harms in the way how religion does it.
So most people opt into religion during times of distress. Using the same logic that you just gave, they're not making a rational choice. So they should not get access to religion?
No, I think you opt into these psychedelic rituals when you feel distressed and you want crazy amounts of hope. You are already religious because that's how the motion functions. How do religions weaponize acids. We think others, obviously other people's agencies manufacture. Obviously there are propagation. We think religion especially does this in phases where you're the most distressed, so that they can get the most amount of opt-in into this. The third sort of harm on heading is just psychological. We think drugs have the capacity to significantly and permanently alter your brain chemistry. This is bad because this takes away your capacity to make a rational decision or informed decision in long term. We think people who take drugs long term or psychedelics long term have been known to suffer from hallucinations, from borderline personality disorders and other disorders which are only as a result of their continued abuse of these particular substances. This means that if you're abusing these circumstances, you have individual harms on your psychology that you do onto yourself. This is able to prove that your psychological capacity also gets depleted in the long term if you continue to abuse these drugs. We think drugs necessarily and uniquely have the capacity to go ahead and make you addicted to them, which means the sort of things that you experience, the sort of things that you see when you're taking a drug, when you're under the influence of a psychedelic, makes you feel like this is the best thing in the world. That is literally why I smoke hash. That is literally why other people engage into these sort of practices. Which means that if these are so very prominent, these are so very addictive, there should be a ban on this, and this ban should be effective. Because we don't want people to do this, even if they feel happy as a result of it. No more POIs. The last thing I want to do is just on the basic harms. We think people die because of laced cocaine. So there are people who are not very rich, people who are probably not very privileged, who also have to engage in these rituals. We think that probably the low quality drugs that these people have to consume also causes independent harms in and of itself, which means that if I'm consuming laced cocaine, probably I die as a result of it, or probably I suffer some permanent physical damage. But we also think that there are things that you do for other people when you're under the influence of drugs. This is literally why drugs are banned in the status quo. You're not only harming yourself, but you're also taking away the agency of other people to exercise their life. Because when I'm under influence, I go ahead and bump into someone with my car, I kill someone, I assault someone. All these are harms that are onto other people just because I wanted some gratification or I wanted some hope. And we think this is principally wrong. What is the comparative and why is it good? We think first, you opt into some other mechanisms, and we think this is pretty simple and intuitive. You are a religious person, you want hope, you go to your community, you go to church, you go to the confession, you ask the priest that, hey, why did this happen to me? Probably the priest gives you some bullshit response, but you buy into it because you're religious. We think these are much better mechanisms to go in and get this sort of gratification and hope that you want in terms of huge amounts of loss than opting into these psychedelic rituals. But secondly, we think your rationality stays, and that's the most important benefit side Prof can claim in this debate, which means that if I'm able to stay rational, at least I also have the ability to opt out of the religion if I feel like religion is doing something back to me. We think on the comparative you lose that. We think you lose the rationality to a bunch of things which are important to you. We think it's the same rationality.
I first want to explain what type of people do even consume these psychedelics in religious rituals, because this team doesn't characterize those people. First, these are people who cannot find God anymore. People who feel lost because life has become so painful for them. You struggle to get food every day. You are punished by the zamindar every day, and you feel suffocated in your own homes because you can't look your mother in your eye because you do not bring money back. You think God is not listening to you, because obviously there are other narratives religion and bigger religions have to get you into religions. Things like God has a plan for you, or things like everything will be okay. These people, when they not relate to these narratives because their current conditions are so bad, are the ones who need to find an alternative. Second, you are riddled by thoughts and worries of future. And religion keeps contradicting itself because it keeps telling you it has a plan, but the issue is you can't conceptualize those rewards now because the current conditions keep hurting you so intricately and so acutely that the future speculative benefits that the religion is telling you feel more far off, feel more speculative. And that's why you feel more and more numbed by the thoughts and worries of future you have in your mind, because you feel God is not with you, or you just can't reach God by the temples that are outside your home. Thirdly, This is often used as a last resort mechanism, which means a lot of completely poor people are the ones who consume this in most instances. Why? Consuming drugs obviously has a lot of stigma. People judge you for being a failed husband and failed man for going to mushrooms instead of actually going out and working. And obviously there is so much media talking about addiction destroying families, which already people know regardless of entering into drugs or not. Because there is war on drugs, as they themselves explain, which has consumed most media spaces that people consume. That means people know about this stigma, people know about the other alternatives religion gives you to escape the harms that you face in the current life. Only when you feel religion is failing you, only when you feel you want God but the temples ain't working for you, is when you enter into these therapies. Second, the pressure for families and societies also no longer work on you because the stigma has become lesser in comparison to the hurt that you feel right now. So you already feel that your family and society has forsaken you, that the state has forsaken you, that your vote doesn't matter, and that's when you enter into these things. These people already live a life of constant torture at government, are oppressed to not being able to think. They never consented to this society and situation at gov also. So if they want to talk about that you can't create agency to enter into these therapies, there is worse comparative on their side because at least on our side you feel high, even if you are not giving your agency. On their side you feel tortured, you feel oppression, and you still haven't consented to that life you are born in. What do these drugs then do? First, they just make you an empty vessel. They take all thoughts out of your body and just throw them in the river. They dilate your blood vessels, your heartbeat slows down and your brain receptors get numb. This is when you break the oppressive chains of thoughts and constrictions that society puts on you, because there is no other way to make your brain numb instead of putting some drugs inside it, which is this ritual gives you, to able to stop thinking about the future worries which you will never get an answer to. Second, they actually make you feel you are talking to God, even if there is no God there. Everyone around you in a ritual, in a community, in a cult, creates an intent that you should think about God when you take these shrooms. And it gives you certainty that you did talk to God. You cry your heart out to the images and to the pictures and to the colors that you see in your mind when you are high during these therapies, which actually makes you feel that for certainly this time I talked to God. Maybe the temples weren't working, maybe the priests weren't working, but this time I saw God with my own eyes, and this is the most certain way I can reach to Him. Thirdly, this gives you free exploration. Society restricts things like clean water for some, dirty water for some. It restricts your movement. It chooses what you say or not when it bans your speech and censors your speech, and it gives no value to your vote as a person. Being an empty vessel is the only way you are free to explore, because there is no constriction when God is with you in your thoughts, in your mind. There is no state that can oppress you, is when you can create the most agency in those thoughts and most agency in those areas. This is already important because principally this is the only certain way for these very people to protect themselves, to protect their humanity, and is the most important way they can self-defend themselves, because the other alternatives are absent. Second, this actually allows people to continue with their lives, being able to work, because now they feel that the future will be fine because I talk to God. Being able to feel that God actually cares about you is when you are able to put into the other alternatives of religion also and feel that the temples are now good. Why does this only happen through religious rituals? First, obviously religious rituals increase access for you to these drugs. Religious leaders tell you how much to take, when to take, and when to stop, and they take it with people around you as a cult, because obviously religious wants as many people as they can to enter into this. So they often give you correct information about how much dose you should take and how much dose you not. And the reason for this is obviously religious leader does not want you to die by overdosing, because that obviously reduces the impact of the scale of his community and scale of his power. But also overdosing just worsens the experience, like you would vomit, you won't see God, it would be completely black out. So obviously religious leaders do not want you to do that. Second, it reduces internal stigma for you. When it comes from a religious leader you can trust. Now you can rationalize that taking drugs is okay because you are reaching God and you are doing a noble purpose which you can't do on their alcohol because of the stigma. This explains that this is the only way to actually break the chains of oppression that society puts on you, on the most downtrodden ones, the most vulnerable, who suffer because of no alternatives.
If it is the case that very few people who go through extreme instances of this drug abuse do it, in that instance it's very likely by Aaryan's analysis that you hurt other people. Is that justifies for the exercises of your own agency?
First, it is unlikely you hurt other people because it is a numbing drug as Psilocybin and stuff like this. You don't get overstimulated, as I already explained, so you are in euphoria. It's unclear where you're walking. But second, you do it with people around you, you do it with religious leaders around you. So even if you want to hurt other people, those are the ones who can stop stop you and tell you how much to take or how not to take. The comparative is way worse. When the ban happens, what does the ban do? First, there is incentive to make or consume these drugs does not go away, obviously, because I already explained the demand and the need of it is so high. This demand creates a need for a black market now, for local religious cartels to originate to make so much money. One, they say that the narcotics board can crack down upon you. I agree. Because of the war on drugs, you often have to go underground. You are forced to use worse material because you can't actually farm mushrooms or farm ayahuasca. That means you are now forced to lace them with fentanyl. Now you are forced to mix them with plastic, which makes it a much worse drug and comparative. Second, it becomes more expensive also as your supply chains are compromised. You have to pay higher to transporters of drugs because the risk is so high of states cracking down on you. That means you either go to low quality drugs because you cannot afford them, or you just lose a bunch more money on death and loss to consume those drugs. Third, you feel more shame on death and loss to talk about the drug intaking with your families or with your friends, because the direct harm is you will go to jail, because that's a thing that the society or the state does not accept. That means no third party gets information on death and house to actually help you when you're overdosing, to actually help you when you're hurting other people. And after that, it is easier to talk with other people to protect you. We can also regulate drugs on our side. We can check for quality, and supply becomes under the control of state, which easily outcompetes against cartels, because states obviously have a lot of money. They can subsidize these drugs and cartels can no longer function. But second, you can control volume. You can ask for proofs from religious leaders about the number of people in your cult and calculate dose amount per person so they don't overdose. Let people live, let people find their God. That happens at all.
Thank you, everyone, for that fine speech, calling me back.
A couple of short words before I begin. First, to my teammates, Aryan and Ghosh, this has been a fantastic tournament. We have had a bumpy ride here. This is the third time we are teaming up. The first time we didn't break, the next time we lost quarters, now we are in finals, so at least it's not first time. This is also my first finals with my ABP teammate, so shout out to Harsh especially. Next shout out to MNMPD Repsoc. We had it cancelled last year, but I think everyone here, juniors, everyone has done a fantastic job in running this tournament. We are having it here, which is a big deal, so yeah. Kudos to them. Next to my friends who have supported me in this journey. Anita is here, I can see her here. And to Mr. Vansh Chadda, my coach. So, oh fuck, Aniket is also here. Shout out to Aniket. So, shout out to my girlfriend who is also here. Stand ready? This team is overly delusional. There are three qualities that I want to fulfill in this speech. The first one I will explain is why there is a need metric for this plan and why regulations on the comparative oftentimes do not work out. There are three reasons for why the regulations do not work. Number one, it is easy for corporations to become hegemonic as a consequence of the demand that they already explained by their own analysis, for them to become extremely powerful in certain areas or in certain regions, as a consequence of which they are able to sell en masse and they are able to establish economies of scale. In which case, if they have enough profits, they are able to lobby governments against regulations, or at least they are able to bypass those channels, especially in vulnerable areas where poor people who are rather uneducated, in which case you do not have enough awareness about it or push back against these things. In which case, the quality of drugs or the accessibility of these drugs radically increases as a consequence of regulations, because there are a vast majority of companies or organizations who are able to bypass these regulations, in which case there is no explanation on how to explain why regulations are good, in which case, now make sure to find this button. Number two, why there is a need for ban and why this is the only way to legitimize the misuse of drugs or to completely ban it. There are three reasons for this. Number one, the ban is necessary because if regulations do not work, you need to impose penalties. You need to impose compliance networks or regulatory frameworks against which companies cannot go against or consumers cannot go against. So there are two levels in this analysis. Number one, companies when they fear that they will be heavily taxed or disincentivized in the market or in the industry, in that instance when they fear loss, they presumably transfer to some other industry or look for other opportunities instead of making a loss-making business, in which case investors also pull out when they do not see a potential in the market in and of itself, when companies do not become innately popular or profitable. Second, consumers also feel the backlash that they will get because of the delegitimization that the state innately does as a consequence of this awareness platform, but also as a consequence of this ban. In which case, consumers also feel deterred from getting involved in these drugs, but also on a local level because regulations do not trickle down that fast, but ban really does because ban is way more radical, in which case there's a larger shock value with the ban in and of itself. In which case, more people get access to this information for why drugs are innately better. This also responds to Rishabh's analysis, in which case awareness is also better when I serve the house. There are three things after this on constructive material that we push from government. All three of them are debate winning. Number one, why this manufacturer's choice? Number two, why this is going to be weaponized by religions and then in a bad way? Number three, what are the implications of all of this and why the most vulnerable populations get harmed? Number one, why is it a manufacturer choice? Religions in and of itself are extremely coercive. You never chose to be Hindu. You never chose to be Muslim. You were born into a Muslim or a Hindu household. Your parents or the social circles in which your parents forced you to interact, forced you to be Hindu or Muslim because the constant interactions that you did as a child, because you did not have a consciousness or you don't have the IQ that is required to be critical of the things that you actively go through or the involvements or the interactions that you presumably have. In which case, you become radicalized or not radicalized, but you at least get indoctrinated into this religion, in which case you consistently follow it. Opt out is extremely hard because religions enforce things like excommunication. Religions enforce things like backlash. Religions enforce things. Fuck my life. ये बंद करते यार
रंजन
इसको बंद करते हैं
वहाँ से वहाँ देखिए
Okay.
Guys, can we have some silence?
I am at 252.
Yes.
Starting again. Opt out of this religion, it becomes increasingly hard as you grow up and you continue to get indoctrinated into religious circles that you do not even consent to be a part of because it is imposed on you when you were a child. In which case, this is an extreme degree of manufacturing of choice that exists on the desk of the house, to which Rishabh has no response. How does this happen? There are two points that are fulfilled under this argument. Number one, this becomes an extremely addictive cycle of drug abuse, which is innately worse. To this, they have a response that says that drug in and of itself is extremely indoctrinated against, and you already have awareness that says you should not consume drugs. I would note that the way in which religious indoctrination works, religious leaders who hold a lot of power over their followers, religions who hold a lot of power over their followers, are able to justify the consumption of these drugs by the way of rhetorics, by the way of saying that it is divine power that says that you should consume this drug. The court allows for you to consume this drug, which is why these people make it allows for these drugs to be accessible, and the majority of people consume this drug. The next response that they have is to say these people, the people that consume it, do it under the most extreme circumstances. To this, I ask a UI to which they have no response. I would note the point at which drugs becomes addictive. You do not do it as a last resort. You do it for the first time probably, but the way in which drug operates, you do it continuously, because if it gives so much catharsis to you as an individual, if it gives so much happiness to you as an individual, and you're able to escape everything bad that goes on in your life, it is very likely that in the next 4 months, it becomes the first resort, and you do not even go to your religious leaders. You just buy the drugs and you consume them on a daily, weekly, and a monthly basis. This unlocks 3 unique harms on-side opposition which they need to defend against. Number one, you do not have the choice to actively opt out of the religion anymore because it is so hooking. It hooks you so much. You get so much utility out of this drugs, in which case you never think critically of the religion that you are a part of. In which case it gives so much leeway to religious leaders to do all kinds of bullshit. But number two, you do not have the consciousness to make rational decisions. Because indoctrination against other religions or the hatred that is bestowed upon you to think critically of Christianity or Islam while being a Hindu is so entrenched within you that when you do not make a choice to hurt them, it is because law forces you not to. Other conscious forces tell you not to do these things. But when you lose that consciousness as a consequence of abusing drugs, is the point at which you think it is fine for me to do so. Even if you don't think, you just end up doing it because you do not think about predetermined outcomes. You do not think the outcome is going to be good or bad. You just end up fucking doing it because you think that I hate this person so much, in which case religious violence increases far, far more. Before I go on,
yeah, I'll give you a chance to engage. You need to explain why is self-harm morally impermissible.
The reason why self-harm is morally impermissible is because number one, you do not enter into the religion in the first place as a consequence of a known consent. Number two, the consent to engage in these drugs is also manufactured by the consequence of the explanation that I already gave. In which case, this is not a last chance, he needs to give speech. Number two, as a consequence of this addiction and as a consequence of the harm that you impose on yourself and the harm that you impose on others. The harm that you impose on yourself. Number one, if you did not previously engage in drugs and now end up engaging in drugs, there are unique harms that come up in your life as an individual. Number one, you do not have meaningful interactions within your family. You do not have meaningful interactions with your friends. You are less productive because you think this is the best escape that I have as a consequence of engaging in drugs, in which case you become less productive and do not engage in meaningful opportunities or take care of them. The point at which I lost my niece during birth last year before spontaneity is the point at which I should have consumed that drug by the analysis that they gave. What I did inside is the comparative burden, which is I engaged with my friends, I talked with my family, people sitting in this room helped me out of that precarious situation, in which case I had the strength to go to spontaneity, and even if I didn't break, I now have the strength to go back and come back at Halloween. This is what happens on outside the house when you are rational enough to make that decision in the best manner possible. This is what you lose on-site opposition, which they are yet to defend against. Number three, what happens as a consequence of this impacting? There are three things uniquely. One, you hurt other people, which is something that I already proven. Because you now justify that hatred as a consequence of consuming drugs, in which case you hurt more people of other religions because the hatred is so entrenched within you, in which case you take away from the unity of other people around you. Number two, you do not meaningfully engage with people around you, in which case you do not give them as much advice, you do not consume as much advice, in which case you are self-driven by drugs, in which case you do not take better decisions for yourself. For all of those reasons, vote down.
और ये फैंस चलेंगे नहीं, बस ये पीछे की तरफ चलेंगे। कंटिन्यूस हाँ नहीं है।
Alright, few shoutouts. First to my teammates, Rishabh and Ansuman. Second to Venki and Sahasra. Your average religious person is obviously not going to consume a drug to get access to God, in the first place. This is obviously a mechanism of last resort for individuals who have access to nothing. It's a mechanism which allows them to free their minds, connect to God as best possible. The problem with this scheme is that they self-medicate themselves in DPM. Because they give you a bunch of reasons for why medication is not going to be effective. They tell you that corporations have bad incentives to lobby and stuff like that. If this is true, then obviously they'll lobby doctors from your side as well when you're going to ban them. And if this is true, obviously the ban doesn't go to the best possible extent. Obviously black markets that we explained first become far more effective on your side, so people consume far less drugs. The second thing is, they themselves explain how there's so much capacity on their side to ban. Presumably there's that much capacity that they explain that exists on our side as well, so we can use all of that capacity to do three things. First, we check the contamination of these drugs, so vast majority of people don't die when they consume them. Secondly, we check the proportion of drugs in people in the cult. So it just can't be that you have 10 people in the cult and you're buying 10,000 kg drugs. We don't think you can go ahead and consume people with that much drugs. The third thing is that we keep a check on the sort of action these people take. So for example, they say that actively one cult is creating massive harm, violent harm, probably going to restrict drug usage to that extent. I don't really see why this is so impossible to do on our side of the house. The final thing that I would note is obviously leaders also have a self-incentive to regulate this. So the religious leader who's providing the drug obviously does not want their cult to hurt other people, because if that happens, then they face backlash from the state. They face backlash to get their cult banned. They also lose out on people that go and fight in this. So when people fight and cause harm others, they can get hurt themselves. And in that process, you lose out on the population that you have, considering that these girls are far more niche, far more exclusive in the first place. They have less people. Obviously, this is not your primary incentive that exists with religious people. This means that you're not really hurting people. The main question in this debate then is, what is the principle on the basis of which you decide whether people deserve access to these drugs? And this is something we explain quite clearly. The first thing that we explain is that religion is paradoxical in nature. God is supposed to be an all-forgiving, all-powerful actor, but at the same time live a life of pain. People's capacity to consume religion and get the highest amount of benefits out of it reduce with time as their life becomes more difficult. So maybe God tells you that they have a plan for you eventually in the afterlife, but your ability to buy into that plan as your suffering increases on a daily level is really limited. This is why your ability to conceptualize religion to get access to God reduces to far greater extent as religion keeps on progressing. Why is the consumption of this specific sort of a ritual the most crucial thing? Because on their side, what ends up happening is that you're not able to restrict yourself from harmful religious narratives. The vast majority of people that do these drugs, for example, the Ghosh, are people who do not get access to religion. These are people who are framed as sinners in the past. These are people who do not deserve access to God, and the reason why God has put them in such a bad situation in the current life is because they committed sins in the previous life in which they lived. These sorts of narratives infiltrate you, and this is the thing. On their side, when these narratives infiltrate you, even the positive ones don't help you feel happy. Maybe somebody tells you that God is there for you. But when you're consuming these narratives and when you're already a vessel filled with negative thoughts, your capacity to let go of those negative thoughts and get value out of the positive thoughts is very limited. This is what changes in our side of the house. These are exactly the sort of people who are most likely to consume these drugs and get access to it, because it makes you an empty vessel. As Rishabh clearly explains in his first speech, the way your brain chemistry works is that all your thoughts go away. And this is exactly the sort of narrative that religious leaders in these cults sell to these people. They tell them that you are a minority within this religion who's been oppressed for a long period of time. Come and access these drugs. You can get access to the true God, which can only be enabled from this. This flips their claim on agency. Because it's on our side of the house that the people who actually deserve the purest form of religion actually get the purest form of religion in the first place to begin with. Religion is supposed to be a tool which helps people overcome the tough times. It is supposed to be a tool for people who are going through those struggles. It is only on our side of the house that these specific actors get access through religion. They say that you're not going to go ahead and make this choice on your own. This is a coerced choice. But the concession that we are makes them lose the debate. Because this claim on agency is uncomparative. What happens to these specific actors in their side of the house? Where do they go? When they consistently when people consistently tell them that religion is not something which is accessible to you, every single choice that you make as a poor person lacks agency. So I'm not really sure why specifically this instance of lack of agency is the tipping point on the basis of which you give this debate to this government. The conclusion is, it's these specific peoples who do this as a last resort, who deserve access to religion in its purest form, get access to it on our side of the house. Now, second question and second extension in this speech. First, what I'm going to explain is that evolution is something which has entrenched people. And this is what it means. Human beings and their thought process and their ability to go ahead and think independently has been captured with time. So as society has evolved, the first thing that has happened is complex societal structures have come into integration. So slowly and steadily, society has told you what to do and what not to do. When we were hunter-gatherers, we did not have a defined way of living life. We had agency to go out and explore life. We had agency to go to that pond and realize what we need to do. But in the modern day, when you are born as an individual who has to live life according to certain rules. Those rules are imposed on you by your parents. As you grow up, your capacity to go ahead and let yourself out of those rules and out of these complex societal structures is fairly limited. The problem here is that your mind is not an empty vessel. The moment you are born in modern day society, your vessel is filled with ideas, pre-existing ideas which are enforced on you. What these drugs do is they help you free up these ideas. They make you an empty vessel. This is why there's a principle right to explain in the first place to begin with. The second thing to note is that narratives have spread way too fast compared to human growth. So what has happened is that the telecom industry has grown, internet has grown. So people's ability to get access to narratives is something that has exploded to the highest possible extent. And the problem here is that when you have access to narratives at such a great speed, your ability to conceptualize your own narratives, your your ability to go ahead and enjoy the construction of those narratives is fairly limited. The conclusion once here again is that your ability to think freely is constrained in the current world in which we live. This is why overthinking is a principal access to these drugs, because these drugs make you free. They make you realize and think of life on your own. They help you become an anti-vessel. They think of ideas on your own. Why is this so beneficial? Before I go on, yes.
So if religion has disappointed you so much, why can you not just quit religion or do drugs? Otherwise, start doing participating in religious rituals.
So obviously you cannot quit religion because quitting means you lose out in communities. Quitting means you lose out in jobs that you have in religion. Quitting means that you have no access to any sort of classes. You can't quit religion. The point here is that the religion that you have access to is not you type. The religion that exists for these individuals does not provide them value. And the sort of religion that we have on our side is the only religion which makes these people feel happy, makes them feel like they belong to the world. That's the first bit we already outlined. What is the impact of this evolution claim? The evolution claim is something that you should care about because it proves that human beings deserve the right to get access to that in the first place to begin with. Particularly poor individuals who are the ones who have to obey the laws most. These are the ones that actually get hurt by these complex time structures because they are told to live life in a specific way. They are the ones that are told to go ahead and use their power in specific ways unless and until you are able to go ahead and free your mind, you don't get any capacity. The second thing that I would explain here is that when you get access to psychedelic rituals, it also means that you're able to talk to God in a very personal way, so your ability to personalize God is far better. God is an actor which is free for interpretation at times, but its interpretation is imposed on people in very coercive ways, that God is a sadist, God is this, God is that. Your ability to think of God independently and to construct these narratives is the reason why people deserve a right to get access to these rituals and enjoy it in the best possible way. It's very clear.
Calling down your turn.
Cool. Harsh showing us with two shoutouts. Firstly to my teammates, actually three. Firstly to my teammates, secondly to KNC DevSoc, wishes for here, and thirdly to my girlfriend. I'll start my speech in 3, 2. The first thing we want to point out is what we say in the POI. We don't know from their bench why religion is the exclusive way and why religious rituals are the exclusive way in which this should happen and why alternative means don't exist. If life sucks and everything is so bad and that you'd rather be incapacitated, smash your brain in a wall and die. Like, there are so many ways to live this sad and miserable life. Why do you take drugs and stay numb throughout that life is something that's unclear. There are so many things you can do. Become a vagabond and live a different life. Buy drugs from elsewhere and not from your religion. These are all things that these people can do. Why do you need religious rituals to do this is something that's super unclear from their side of the house. The first thing I want to then explain is I'm going to push forward why a principle matters so much in this round. The first thing I want to point out is who consumes this and who does this. They say that these are people who go through very extremely sad and dire situations. The first thing I want to explain is that there is still a principle violation because you don't consent into the actual harms that come out of this. Because you lack the awareness of what happens once you take these drugs. You think that you will probably opt out of these drugs after the first or the second time. You can't because of the reasons that we explained to you. You probably think that you'll be able to hold some rationality within yourself and manage your rationality and decide what you want to do, but presumably that does not happen because of the mechanisms that we give you at Aryan. But thirdly, you don't know how this will impact people around you. You don't know how your wife will feel or how your children will feel when you are not there in the household, but rather consuming drugs and doing religious rituals in the church. These are all things that you don't know about, which is why you don't meaningfully consent into taking these drugs in the first place. They have a flimsy response, which is that you know because war on drugs. And how many people in the world know about the war on drugs? drugs? How many people know about the bad impacts that drugs actually have? And yet people still opt into this. People in rural Punjab don't know why drugs are bad. They do drugs all the time and enjoy that. There are people on the street who consume drugs because it makes them happy. People don't know why the common drugs matters. They don't know about drug cartels. Not everyone is as educated as the people in the room. A vast majority of people are unaware about these things in the very first place. That's why it doesn't work. Secondly, their second claim on this is that, oh, you know what you can do? You can put like certain restrictions on how much you give. But presumably these are so effective in ensuring that these people remain within the religion, but also so effective in making them happy. It means that religions have an incentive to continue pushing them onto people. That's why religion gives them more the doses that they want. But how to flip this? If religion does not give them the same doses, where do they go to when they feel the urge to have these drugs once again? Where they want to feel happy because this drug is the only mechanism that now makes them feel happy. That's where they go to the backstreet alley and try to buy crack or cocaine that is laced with rat poison and go through the certain bad harms that we talk about. Which means that if religion does this in proportionate manners, that's a bad thing, but we explain that they don't do it in a proportionate manner. The third thing is that their case is contingent on, oh, this is about just this person. We explained at Aryan that the way religions propagate this is that you consume this drug and you tell people around you that when they are sad, that you should have this drug because guess what it did for me? It made me happy. That I was able to cope up with the things and the losses that I face in life. These are the people who never meaningfully consent into this because presumably they weren't just as sad as this person was, but this person only knows one way of coping, which is this drug that they have. That's how they influence other people into consuming these drugs in the very first place because that's what made them feel happy and think that that's how others should also lead their life. Even if their incentive is on how you can exercise your agency yourself meaningfully, this agency does not exist for the people who have the trickle-down harms of this because other people influence them into consuming these drugs in the very first place. This explains that what are principal stands of why you never meaningfully consent into consuming these drugs in the very first place, but secondly, why there are negative harms that people have on this. Why does this happen in a bad way? So, Aryan explains and gives you multiple reasons for why these are super addictive and change the way your brain functions. They give you multiple reasons for why they make you feel super happy, which means that this creates relax. There are 4 harms that we derive out of this. The first is that people who depend on you are directly harmed by this. This challenges their agency principle because agency only works insofar as you don't harm other people out of this. Who are the kinds of people you harm out of this? The first is people around you, your family, your grandparents, your mother, your children. These are all the people that are harmed by you becoming incapacitated to earn. Note that in rural areas, most men are the breadwinners in the household. If the man is incapacitated and the women in the household does not have education because that's not something that happens in India, they never access the sort of breadwinning capacity that exists in the very first place. This is a direct harm on them as a result of them consuming these drugs and becoming as addicted as they claim it happens on their side of the house. Secondly, you don't feel the same joy and utility out of other things in your life because now this is the thing that makes you the most happy because of what they expect. Because you're so attached and connected to the God that you now see when you consume these drugs and the happiness and the utility you derive out of it. This has 2 impacts. The first is you disconnect from people and stop doing things with them in real life because those things don't give you joy anymore. I don't go to debate competitions with Aryan and Ayushman because now I have this drug that I can rely on, feel happy because I see my God and the God that loves me and makes me feel happy so much. This is why you directly harm other people, but secondly, you don't meaningfully derive utility. Because what happens in the high of that drug phase? What happens when you realize that I was just in this incapacitated position because of this religious ritual that I engaged in? That's when you question yourself and that's when you go and have the next pill. Because that's the only pill that makes you feel happy and capacitated. Yeah.
I'll give you another chance to engage. When are the instances in which we value consent?
So, we again value consent insofar as it does not harm the autonomy of other people. We give you a lot of reasons for why this harms the autonomy of other people. Thirdly, we don't allow people to kill someone else if they feel happy out of killing that person because it's a violation of that person's autonomy. This is directly linked to the response to the fear that we give. Because we think that people do bad things under the influence of not only these drugs, but the other drugs that they start to access now as a result of wanting that more of a high, wanting that hedonistic treadmill of I've had crack, now I want more different drugs, I want a better drug, I want salvia, I want DMT. This is the chain that they unlock on their side of the house when you enter into the first drug and the first experience with it. We think that that's bad. What do we tell you happens on the comparative? We told you that the ban is effective. We gave you 3 reasons that go unengaged with in the first place. The first thing we told you is that these religions are competing against each other, which is like they call out the other religion that has this. Secondly, we told you that we told you that NGOs and these religions care about these people, and that's why they spread educational narratives about why you should not have a judge on our side of the house. We thirdly told you that there are whistleblowers within these communities or people who are offered these drugs who can call these religions out. This is why the ban is effective. On their side of the house, even if certain regulations do work, people still want more drugs, they still want that high, and that's why they're offering to more, and that's the biggest harm in this round. At the end of this, we've proven you three things. One, the gravity of impact on the people impacted by this is more. Secondly, there's no reversibility of this because you can never opt out of this high that you've had. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, doctor, for that fine speech calling off the pure ground.
Ask, you are verbalize and ask only. Like, don't ask around 550.
Guys,
Shout out to Abdul and Rishabh. Great team. Second time speaking with Rishabh is also really good. Okay. Friends I have here. Guys are all my friends. All of these people are really good friends. This shout out, I'll take a bit of time. Shout out to the campus of MNM. This not just in terms of music. MNM was the first time I reached the finals. I might or might not have good memories of MNM 2024 because of external reasons, but this comp has been really valuable to my start of my journey. I don't think I'm extremely successful creator, but I think whatever I've done, this has been a good platform. Start on the first one. These are people crying for God every day, to see God, to hear God, to talk to God, and to let people know that God is hearing these issues. These are the people that are the actual center of this area, and not people who are just taking drugs for the sake of it. What is the thing that is unspecific, quite non-specific? The first thing to say is that the biggest reason we should care about banning this is because you harm other people, and that is really bad. But the problem is, this is a small section of the amounts of drugs that are normally used, which is to say, if they're fine with recreation, recreation is the biggest thing that causes people to harm each other in the first place, which means the margin that you can draw out of this specific thing, hurting other people, this is quite non-specific to the motion itself. But Rishabh already beats this. Rishabh explains that this happens in safe spaces, and there are reasons and there are incentives for these safe spaces to actually control you and limit how you hurt others in the first place. But then they divert. They say that you harm people around you, and the way you harm people around you is that there are people who are dependent on you, and because these people are dependent on you, you owe an obligation. The first thing I want to actually explain is I want to ask all of you on the panel, come out of your moral biases. Do they explain why, if somebody is dependent on you, you owe a moral obligation? I think you don't owe a moral obligation to somebody who's just dependent on you, because you did not choose for them to be dependent on you. You did not choose to particularly be born into parents that were impoverished and are depending on you for you to own or source their breadwinning. You did not, in many cases, choose your wife. You did not choose to like the person. You did not have control over your feelings, because they also do not explain what capacity of control exists on the comparative. So just because you have, you love somebody does not mean you particularly have control over the emotions you feel, and does not automatically mean you owe an obligation to them. They need to explain why this person owes an obligation to them in the first place. But the first thing I'll point out is you owe a higher obligation to yourself. The reason you owe a higher obligation to yourself is because you are the only person that is aware of the utility calculus that you can do. You are the only person that is concerned and is aware of what gives you utility, what is meaning for you. And you are the only person that were born alone. You don't even know if other people exist. Maybe all of you guys are robots. I don't really know. What particularly I know is that I exist as a person, and I know myself the most. I know about my utility the most, which particularly means the way in which I exercise my decisions ought to be centered around how I create utility for the thing that I know the most certain about. Which is to say, if the metric is to create certain utility, the people can only create certain utility for themselves. I cannot know for certain if your utility is the same as my utility in the first place. You owe a higher obligation in a sense. I just want to deal with the myth of the debate on agency, because that's the biggest thing that they push out. What do they say on agency? The first thing that they say is that there's very little information, which is why people in rural villages don't know. But what is the PM framing, and what is the way in which government uses this? Government says that there are incentives for governments to spread awareness campaigns, that there are incentives for NGOs to do this in Dubai by NGOs spreading awareness campaigns within these areas. So if Gov has the fiat to say that we can spread awareness campaigns within these areas and penetrate these areas, obviously the same fiat applies to them. This is not a part of the motion, which particularly means if awareness is the clash, PM already outframes awareness as a reason for why you cannot consent into these drugs. That means no reasoning, or you are not aware about your surroundings, is not reasoning that you should consider in the first place. But the second thing I would do is that even if you are unaware about the specific cause of something, that does not mean you cannot consent into the general things that you think you like between this. Which is what they say. They say that addiction happens because you get a lot of utility out of it. It's rather unclear why people should not have the right to decide for themselves what they want utility out of. The only thing that they say in this is that people are irrational when making these decisions. But they don't explain why irrationality means that you should not be allowed to make decisions in the first place. Which is to say, when I'm irrational, I say things that hurt other people, but that does not mean you'll put me in a jail because I'm hurting somebody else. Because even when I'm irrational, that means that the reason agency comes out and the reason consent is a fundamental part is that we think humans have the right to dictate how they want to live. We think that people are fundamentally singular events and not large cumulative events who can determine their own life events for themselves, and who should have the right to determine how they want to live their lives in the first place. Now I want to come to the actual meat of the deciding thing of consent within the round. Why do these people are not able to find God otherwise? The thing that they say is that, bro, you can find meaning elsewhere, you can recover, you can do a lot of things, but there's no certainty of any of that happening in the first place. The way we explain this is that a lot of times the people who opt into this are people who do this as a means of last resort, and they don't engage with these claims, because we explain that obviously there are a lot of social narratives that keep telling you that taking drugs is bad, but obviously their own mechanism is that religions are competing against each other. If religions are competing against each other, then religions have incentives to tell you that taking drugs is bad in the first place, which means their own mechanism also explains why you can have the pushback on taking drugs, which means that the people who actually opt into taking drugs like this are people who are crying for God, are people who are crying for meaning and cannot access that meaning because they cannot visualize the meaning happening in the first place. These are really poor people who do not have access to just money and have access to that kind of happiness that can actually unlock meaning from them. Which means what do they default to? What do they default to as a way of extracting meaning? They default to the abstract. But the problem with the abstract is that you cannot visualize the abstract. You cannot use the abstract to help yourself in the moment. You cannot use the abstract to defend yourself from the grueling pain that life puts on you, which you also do not consent to. Which means all the things that I talk about are things that you do not consent to in the first place. Go on.
look into you. You probably do not owe an obligation to the mother that gave birth to you, but at least you owe an obligation to yourself for the success that you might accrue and be happy about.
The problem is, the way you attain success is different for everybody, which is to say, everybody decides their own utility calculus. Everybody decides how they want to derive their utility and what constitutes utility from them. They are nobody to tell these people that you are getting wrong utility out of consuming these drugs because you cannot access other forms of meaning. Maybe they think this is the form of meaning that they want to access in the first place. The first thing that this explains is that the way in which you access meaning is by visualizing God which you cannot visualize on their house. Which means that the only form of certain meaning that these people can a lot of times find is through accessing these religions, is through going to these rituals and actually thinking that they're talking to God. It does not matter if they're actually talking to God or not. They feel meaningful doing these actions in the first place, which means this is the most certain thing in the round. The second thing we obviously will not, which they also don't engage with, and this is also something that we should credit highly, is because they don't actually deal with what happens on the comparative. The first thing that they don't explain is why does the person actually feel happy on the comparative, but why does the person not get into worse forms of drugs on the comparative as well? Which is when there is a black market created at a point in time when these drugs are not regulated, you get access to much more dangerous drugs compared to the regulated mass-produced drugs that these corporations can use, which particularly means you have access to safer drugs and all of their harms worsen just in terms of scale. At a point in time, you have higher intensity of worse drugs being infiltrated into the market.
Thanking also for the fine speech calling off the life control.
There are two pathways to this concept. The first thing that they say is that you can get access to other sorts of things, other sorts of drugs, and you can very easily all the way in life. Why do you need access to it? This is completely outweighed by access to it. The first thing that we explain is that your ability to consume drugs in general is very different. You will shame, you will war on drugs in the first place to begin with, you can't hide it from your parents, you can't get legitimacy. That becomes far easier when it's religion that's telling you to do it, when it's a religious act that who is considered. The government response has to say that who knows about the war on drugs, who knows about shaming. When a policeman is beating you up while you're consuming a drug, obviously you understand what the war on drugs is. This is a day-to-day experience that people go through consistently. I'm not really sure whether they need to be used to understand. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that your ability to find a community to do this is really limited on to alternatives. There's also a large terms where that community exists in the form of this ritual, and therefore they're able to find meaning in it. But the final thing that we explain is your ability to go ahead and exercise religion as a tool to get catharsis is fairly limited. You need somebody to guide you to do it. It's these religious actors who help you do it. When you consume these drugs, they tell you what the ritual is about. When you practice that, so that is when you feel you're actually consuming this drug in such a way, in the way in which it is supposed to be consumed, in the way in which God will connect with you. So your ability to connect God and drugs is fairly limited if you don't have access to religious rituals. It's something you can explain. They don't engage with it. But the second thing is that they just burden you. They never explain the comparative, right? So if they say that there are alternatives and there are alternatives, and government is smashing their head into a wall. Explain to me why that's effective. Tell me why that's something which helps you be happy. Give me some reasons for why these alternatives are useful and you time helping you be happy. They do nothing but that. The second part would be pleased to say that your agency comes at an expense of others' agency. So if you consume the drug, you harm others. The first thing to note is that you obviously outweigh this because Ansuman explains to you that you have a far higher obligation to yourself than you have to others. The mechanism has that you consume the highest amount of time with yourself. You know yourself the best. We talk to ourselves more than you talk to anybody else in this world, and therefore the obligation that you have exists for yourself. But the second is a circular argument. So even if you don't buy the name, I don't think you should credit it. Why? Because if you are harming the agency of others by taking drugs, others are also harming your agency by not allowing you to do stuff. So if your mother is going to be harmed because you consume drugs and you can't take care of her, obviously your mother should not be dependent on you, because if she is dependent on you, then your agency is also getting harmed. So the trade-off of agency exists symmetrically on both sides. It's about the actor. I don't think they say agency on that. What do we explain to you and what is the moral justification for psychedelics? The first thing that we explain to you is that these drugs are taken as a last resort than a first resort. We explain to you that this is genuinely going to be useful. Their response is to say that if the amount of happiness that you get out of the drug is so high, you're probably going to consume this in the first place to begin with. Firstly, this is outframed by shaming, which I earlier mentioned. Secondly, religious leaders don't have the incentives to make it your first resort because it is obviously something which is that evil. I'm pretty sure that the average person can go to mosque and pray 5 times if they want to find meaning in religion. There are obvious alternatives that exist in religion as practices. This is obviously the practice you choose when other things don't work for you. People are rational enough to understand that drugs can be harmful for them in the first place to begin with. But the second thing that we do is that we explain to you why getting access to this is morally justified on 3 levels. The first thing is the paradox of life. We explain to you that the capacity of you to absorb religion and derive utility out of it decreases with time as life gets worse. Religion tells you that God has a plan for you, but when life keeps on getting worse, the threshold of you to understand this is very limited. So you need ability to clear up your mind. You need ability to be a free vessel to consume that idea of religion and derive utility out of it. Therefore, you deserve access to it. The second thing that we explain, and this is the second layer of moral justification, is the way people exercise religion. We tell you that religion is framed by pernicious actors with bad incentives in such a way that they tell minority communities and outcasts and frame them as outcasts and tell them that they are the ones that don't deserve access to religion. That God put them in this situation of poverty because God does not love them, and in the previous life they have committed sins. Your ability to take control of religion as a narrative and to personalize the God and to personalize it to a best extent only exists on our side, because when you consume this psychedelic, that is when you become free as a person. That is when you are an empty vessel who can consume of religion in different ways. But the final thing that we explain is evolution, which they don't engage with as well. We tell you that your ability to think of narratives and construct them is something that has been restricted by society. You deserve the principal right to deconstruct your mind in a way which is accessible to you. That's the individual autonomy you will ever get in this debate that happens from us.
Thank you all for calling us covered by this.
I don't know why they debate this motion like an actor's motion. This is not this house as a very sad person will consume. This is just a THPD motion. This is a PHW motion. And we think we should ban drugs because of the visceral harms to society. They have no reasons to outweigh this visceral harms to society. They have no reasons except saying that others' agency don't matter because they also violate your agency. But you have a reparative obligation towards these people because these people are your parents who gave you birth, who did things for you. These people are your wife who you entered into a relationship with and you promised certain things to her. These people are your kids who you born into the world and you owe them something. And you owe them the basic decency of being a good father. Who's not a drug addict, who's not a crack addict. They never deal with this. Their principle is just very simplistic and is very dismissive. But secondly, what do they say? They say that drugs make you an empty vessel, and religions make you do this in a safe space. I have multiple things to note. Do they ever tell you why? So the first thing is, do they ever tell you why this person who is so addicted will listen to the religious messaging about what is the correct amount of dosage to have? So presumably, if I'm so fucking addicted, I'll just have as much drugs as I want, and I won't buy into the religious messaging of oh no, only whatever a day is enough, but more than that is bad. So I don't think that works that way. But more importantly, we think they never really tell you why religions exclusively need to do this. So this motion is about religions doing this within themselves. So why do religions need you to get hooked on rituals? Because we have independent reasons to tell you why when religions do it, it's extremely bad. Because if individuals consume drugs, they don't have religious messaging to back it up and propagate to other people. But when religions propagate to you, you have incentives to go to other people and tell them, hey, this is a good thing, you should probably try it out. If you feel like all of this lost, you should probably take this psychedelic and make you feel good. All of these things are about why exclusively religion should not be the one to do this. They are again very dismissive of this. We have 3 metrics, different metrics on which we can run this. The first is just on scale, and I think Harsh is doing very well to explain why we prove why there are on-scale harms to society. But secondly, just on reversibility. But the other mechanisms that we are pushing throughout the bench have reversibility. So even if you opt into drinking, even if you become a drunkard, there are rehabs and drinking doesn't alter your brain chemistry permanently. But the harms that they accrue on their side as a result of taking these psychedelics are irreversible, which means that's another metric for us to win on. But thirdly, it's just a harm principle, and I don't think they're ever able to beat it. If I, as an individual, am exercising my agency in a way that harms other people around me, that is a principal violation of their own agency, in which case it's okay for you to take my agency away. This is literally the explanation that prisons work on. I killed someone, I robbed someone, I took their agency away. This means that I should be put inside jail. Which means these are three separate metrics on which we are taking this away. The last thing that I am going to say is that their framing of, or their response to POI on religion itself and them becoming disutile is just very, very contradictory. So if my religion has become so very disutile to me, why do I not just opt out of it? Why am I constantly just staying within my religion just for the sake of it? Because if my religion has nothing to give to me, no catharsis to give to me, then we say that you should probably opt out of it and seek other ways to work in this community. Because it's their claim that the religion gives you nothing now. The last thing I want to clarify within this debate is that these are vulnerable people who have lost everything and this is their field. When I have lost everything and I am exposed to an addictive substance, probably I don't buy any of the safe space arguments they are running. Probably I do it in the worst fucking way possible. I want to see God every single minute. I want to see God every single hour. I do this drug every single minute. I do it every single hour. Which means it's a slippery slope argument on our side when you just don't, even if you want to stop, you can't stop